Thank everyone for joining us for our PPP loan webinar. Today, we're going to talk about forgiveness. With us today, I have my dad, Bob Saunders, and Richard Scherzer from About Floors and More. Richard, can you spend 1 second just giving a background on yourself and your store?
Sure, Todd. We've been in business for 18 years. We have 2 stores in Jacksonville, Florida. We do a combination of builder, remodelers, commercial, and residential. We have 12 part-time people, full-time people, 12 full-time people, and 1 part-time person.
Okay, appreciate that. And Dad, I know you gave a background on yourself on the previous webinar, but can you give 1 minute background on yourself and your expertise?
Sure. Well, I'm a local CPA. I run a CPA firm that handles small business clients, like I assume most of the people listening. And I'm Todd's dad. Pretty proud of both.
Yeah, very lucky of you.
Very regrettable.
Yes. So today we're going to talk about loan forgiveness. Like we mentioned before, a lot of people listening to this webinar got the PPP loan, and the next step after getting the PPP loan is loan forgiveness. So, Dad, do you mind giving everyone a little bit of background on kind of the PPP loan, and then we'll start to get into forgiveness?
Sure. Well, at our last meeting, we stressed on the importance of getting the largest loan possible. And now the goal is to use that loan as efficiently as possible. And to me, the most efficient use of it is having it forgiven. And so it's a very tricky formula to have it forgiven. And like with the maximum loan amount, guidance kept coming out as we're doing the applications. As a matter of fact, the best guidance just came out 2 days ago. And quite frankly, we were done doing loan applications at that point. So the guidance was a little silly. I'm concerned the same thing is going to happen here. So we're going to give you what we think the law is and how we're interpreting it. You have to be prepared to move and groove as we get additional guidance, and we'll try to share that as we get it. But there are 5 major ways that your loan forgiveness can be reduced, and some of them are much more than dollar for dollar, and we're going to go over them. But in general, the first one is, how much money do you spend on qualified payroll and on rent and utilities? If you borrowed 100, you only spent 80, you're certainly not going to get 100 forgiven. You're down to 80 to begin with. The next is a reduction in your employee count. If your count goes down by 30%, so is your loan forgiveness, or 100% it might go down. We'll talk about that. The next one is a reduction on an employee by employee basis for any employee that earns less than they were earning before. Another reduction occurs if your rent and utilities exceed 25% of the forgiveness. And then the final reduction would be if you received an EIDL grant, you have to lower your forgiveness by that amount as well.
Right. So we're going to be talking through forgiveness. And I know you went through the 5 things that can reduce your forgiveness, but just to speak in layman terms, right, we're basically talking about how you don't have to give back your loan, right?
Correct.
So these 5 things that we're going to talk through will be reductions of how much you have to give back. Ideally, you have to give none of it back, but that's kind of the whole topic of forgiveness here today.
Right. That's the goal, but coming close is people should be pretty happy. So Richard, why don't you tell me about yourself and about how many employees you have and how much of a loan you received?
Well, we have 10 full-time employees and 4 part-time. And to make it simple, we got $100,000. So it'll be an easy number to work with for everybody.
Okay. And approximately how much is your rent?
Our rent, we have 3 locations. Our rent's going to be $30,000.
Okay. And do you provide health insurance or pension to your employees?
Yes, both. The people that subscribe to the health insurance and want to put away that program.
That's great. Okay. So we talked about several ways that you get less of your loan forgiven. The first one, the most relevant one, is your employee count. And so you have to establish how many employees you had prior to the loan compared to how many after the loan. And I know that sounds practical, but you don't just count heads. We believe we're interpreting this as counting what's called full-time employee equivalents. And so if those full-time people are on salary, then they each count as a head. If, however, you pay people hourly and they work 20 hours, they're considered a half an employee. There's actually 3 potential periods by which you're allowed to examine this. Let me pull up my notes here. So, because businesses have different cycles and different seasons. And so they give you 2 choices that anyone can choose from. One is February 15th, 2019 to June 30, 2019, which is an 18-week period. Another is January and February of 2020, which is an 8-week period. And then your third choice is the 52-week period by which you based your loan. And that could have been calendar 19 or April 1st, 2019 to March 31st, 20. Do you remember which one you used in your calculation?
I showed them payroll for 2019.
Okay, so your 3 choices are, February to June of 19, January and February of 20, or all of 2019. And I suggest that everybody actually go through those periods and determine when they had the least number of average full-time equivalent employees. You might be surprised how it can deviate, over those periods. And you'll see why in a few moments, why it's important to start out with the lowest number possible of full-time equivalents. As soon as you get the loan, you're basically in a sprint. You have 8 weeks to spend this money appropriately to get forgiven. And so in the end of the 8 weeks, you have to examine what your average full-time employment was and then express that in a form of a percent with the 8 weeks in the numerator and your lowest FTE equivalent from the past in the denominator. And the goal is to be at least at 100%. If you're not at 100%, you start to lose. I think we're going to do some Excel spreadsheets later on that I'll show you the dramatic example, but having one less person that maybe you would have paid $5,000 can easily cost $12,000 or $15,000. So you're really inclined to use it hard. Some people are interpreting this law that if you don't use 75% of your loan on employees, that none of it is forgiven. I don't believe that interpretation is true. I don't believe that was the intent of the law, but the law is difficult to read and understand. It was written poorly and quickly. It's only a few pages. But again, the interpretations are going to be probably 500 pages, before they're done.
Bob, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So say in 2019, I had a total of, based on part-time and full-time, 13 full-time people. And in the 8 weeks, I only have 12. So I would qualify on the full-time employees. Right. Because I'd be over 100%, correct?
No, you said you went from 13 to 12?
I was 13 in 2019.
And now during the 8-week period, you only have 12.
Correct.
So then you would lose. So if you spent exactly $100,000 on payroll, and that was your only cost for the loan, you would lose 1/13 of that amount regardless. And so in a more typical example, you would have, say $80,000 or $90,000 of payroll because you didn't have as many employees. And so not having that extra employee loses from the top. And so instead of starting with 100,000 of forgiveness, you start at a lower dollar number, maybe 90 or 95,000 because you had one less employee. And then you lose a second time in the form of a percentage loss on that. And so it impacts you more than double in that case.
And when we say loss, we just say it's not forgiven, right? They're not taking the money from you. You just have to pay it back at, I think, what is a 1% interest rate over a period of time.
Yes, but it's important to evaluate, is it worthwhile to pay an employee to sit home or to hire someone at a low rate to come in and clean the floors or paint the walls or clean the ceiling and do all these other things, you might find that it's profitable, that you make more money by paying people based on these formulas.
Yep. And you've talked about payroll a bit. Like, what is included in payroll?
Good question. So payroll includes obviously what you pay people. However, there are top side limits. So it's based on not paying anybody more than $100,000 a year. So you can't pay them $100,000 in the 8 weeks. You may be limited each week. 100,000 divided by 52 weeks is, I think, $1,923. So you may be limited $1,923 per week, or maybe you're limited in 8 weeks in aggregate to $15,385. It certainly isn't going to be more than that, and that's for any employee. And I come to those numbers just by dividing the number of weeks into $100,000. For the employees, you are allowed to add health insurance and pension benefits that you pay. But according to the most recent interpretations of the law, you can't do it for the owner. If you're a C Corp or an S Corp, maybe it flies. If you are an LLC or a sole proprietorship, I do not believe you'll be able to add your own health and your own pension into that.
Richard, do you have any subcontractors?
Yeah, I have a lot of subcontractors, but I wanted to ask Bob a question. Bob, back to the full-time employees. If your employee count, part-time, full-time, as you explained very well, changed over the year or the basis that you use for your loan, how do they figure out what the basis is for the benchmark for the loan?
Right, so this is complicated. So let's take a step back and look at it step by step. First step is to really get information that you need to make the best decision. First thing that you need to do is compute your lowest FTE. So here's a chart, and this is set up for hourly employees, but look, you could do it on a napkin for all it matters. There's nothing special about this, but it really is looking at the 4 potential periods and coming up with the least FTE. So option 1, just to take you through that one, is we listed the dates, the hours people work. We got that directly from someone's payroll records, and it came to 5,043 hours. There's 18 weeks of net payroll cycle, so it came to an average of 280 hours that week, which is divided by 40 and is 7 FTEs for that pay period. If all you have are full-time people, then you can do this weekly. Put 18 in for everyone that worked every week, 15 if they work 15 weeks, and divide the total by 18. There's lots of ways to do it depending on how you pay. The key is to do it for all of those cycles and come up with the lowest number possible. Your choices in coming up with the period with the lowest FTE really evolved as we expect some of the rules for forgiveness to evolve. In the original law, they allowed you options 1 and option 2. The theory is that option 1 resembles the time of year you're in now compared to the time of year last year. Option 2 is there because there were a lot of, if your business changed over the years, if you were doing a lot more or a lot less business, it would give you a time to better represent where you really were now. But then as guidance came out, the SBA decided that you could use the same period for which your loan is based, which originally was supposed to be option 3, the 12 prior months. But then as it evolved even further, the SBA, I guess the banks were complaining it was too hard to do. So they gave a 4th option, which is, okay, the year just ended, why don't we just use calendar year 2019? And so really all 4 of those options are generally going to be available to you to pick and choose from. Have them ready in case the bank says, no, you can't use this or you have to use that. It's going to happen. There's not going to be uniformity among the banks, but be prepared and get the lowest number you can. So everyone can choose between 1 and 2 or 3 and 4, depending on, so 1 and 2 is available to everyone, and then 3 or 4 is based on how you based your loan. The problem is every bank did it differently. Look, some banks took one payroll and multiplied it by 52, so they didn't really use anything. The law was originally written that you had to use the 12 prior months, and so that would be option 3. But then they came up with guidance that says that you could use the calendar year. I actually think in the end, people could probably use any of the 4. Step 2 is to get a ballpark figure on what you anticipate your payroll to be during this 8-week period. Again, you can do this on a napkin, however you want to do it. This is something we set up for our clients. We divide it into hourly and salaried people. And so, if you, let's take George Washington. He has a salary of $150,000. He's going to be working all 8 weeks. And so he is, as a salary person working all 8 weeks, 1 FTE, 1 full-time person. His earnings are going to be $23,000, but the allowable earnings, because they're limited, is $15,385. I'm just going to take you through a couple more so you kind of understand what we're doing. The next person, John Adams, he earns $80,000 a year, but he's not coming back for 4 more weeks. So he is a half of an FTE, and his earnings should all qualify. Going down to the bottom half, you have hourly people. And so all we're really doing here is multiplying out their hours by the number of weeks they work to come up with if they're an FTE or what portion of an FTE they are. And so the goal in this is to estimate, based on your projections, how many FTE you have, or you're going to have. For this example, we come up with 4.75. And then we're going to work from there. The next bit of information that we want from this spreadsheet is your allowable forgiveness per employee. And that's the $49,509. It's not your total payroll because some people are limited. Just a comment on FTEs. If someone works 45 hours in a week, you only get to count 40. And so going back to the first spreadsheet and on this spreadsheet, if someone works 45 one week and 35 the other week, that doesn't mean it's 80 and it's equal. So you eliminate any week that they worked over 40 hours. You don't count those hours. So it's a maximum of 40 hours or 5 days, or however you, whatever, or weeks, however you're working that, it's on salary. But overtime doesn't count in the formula. All right, let's go back to the projection. Okay, so again, in this projection, the goal is to come up with a projected FTE and a projected allowable forgiveness per employee for that total of 49,000. If we scroll a little to the right, here's the hardest test that we really understand the least about, and that's the employee by employee count. And so here, this is the most difficult part of the forgiveness to understand and to compute. We start out by listing what every employee earned in the prior 3 months, which typically should be the first quarter of 2020. We don't believe that you have to pay 75% of that. We believe it's going to be a weekly average, but you have to pay attention for a change in the rule about that. So if you're a biweekly payroll, you could have paid 6 or 7 times, and so you might want to divide that by 12 or 14. If you're a weekly payroll, you divide it by 13. You have to look and see how many payrolls you had in that cycle, but come up with an average amount you paid them per week in the 3 months prior to the PPE loan. And then your goal is to pay them 75% of that amount, of 75% of that times 8. The first person was earning $28.85. You have to pay them $21.63 in order to get full forgiveness. And so we have some formulas here that, if you paid them 75%, it says good. If not, it shows you how much you're short. Just to go over some of the technicalities for this part, if they earned over $100,000 at the rate of over $100,000 in any prior pay period in 2019, you don't have to consider them. If they don't work for you at all in the 8-week period, you don't have to consider them. If they're back, and this is each employee on its own, if they're back full-time by June 30th, you don't have to count them. But again, that's a Hail Mary. We don't really know how that's going to work out, so we have to try to I want you to qualify during the 8 weeks and at the end of the 8 weeks. So in this case, there was a $961 weekly shortage of what we're paying people. And so we multiply that by 8, and you're going to lose after we're done with all the other reductions, another $7,690 of forgiveness. This is a starting point. So now we have the information we need in order to do some projections and play around a little bit. This is really the key, and this is really the tool to help you understand where you are now. So in this example, what I want to do is look at column C, the baseline. In this example, the store received an $85,000 loan. Their payroll from the projection on the other page came to $49,509. And we're entering in the green sections. How much are the employee benefits for that period of time? How much is the rent for that period of time? And what is their base FTE? These are all the green items. So in this case, you can see that we're projecting 4.75 FTEs out of a baseline of 6.2. So we're only going to get 78.9% forgiveness. Now it's up to you to have some fun. Up on the top lines 11 and 12, where it's green, you can enter anything you want, and you can see how that plays a role. I put something in there to start you with, but feel free to play around. In the first example, scenario 1, I said, all right, what if we hire someone 20 hours a week for $12.50 an hour to clean? And what happens to us for that? Well, the first thing is it cost us $2,000. But if you look and see the impact it had by increasing our forgiveness percentage from 78.9 to 87%, it looks like we're saving about $7,000. So it cost us 2, but we're saving 7. So we really profited by $5,000 for hiring someone for 20 hours a week at $12.50 an hour, and hopefully they cleaned the place up or mowed the lawn or painted something. Scenario 2, just a little more dramatic. We had another half a person. Let's go over to scenario 3, where we are getting 100%, because now we have 6.25% in FTE, which is more than 6.02. So the best we can do is 100% on line 20. And so now it becomes dollar for dollar. Spend more, you save $1 for every dollar you spend. But until you reach that 100%, it's going to pay people to work for you to increase your percentage there. But again, this is for you to play around with and begin to learn and understand this. And feel free to show it to your accountant and run through some scenarios with them. You got to make the most of this. Take advantage of it. Be creative. All right. Our goal in creating this spreadsheet was really for people to play around with and make up their own scenarios based on realistically what they can do. Here in scenario 3, we actually plugged an amount of money, $16,491, because we knew that we'd use up 100% of what they were spending. Now, that exceeded the $15,385 per person, so that has to be more than one person. We said that was 1.5 people. And so by using the $16,491, we spent 100% of the money. And by adding 1.5 FTEs, we exceeded our baseline. So we're going to get to keep 100%. And so this really is the ultimate solution here. And you'll notice that out of the $85,000 of loan, we're forgiving. They're going to get $85,000 forgiven. And that's what I'd like to see everyone achieve. So in the baseline, as you're filling in the green items, we put 6.02 in as your baseline FTE. That came from the first screen that we looked at with the 4 possibilities of your lowest baseline. And in this example, option 2, the January and February of 2000 was our lowest number. And so obviously that's the number we're going to choose. 6.02, right? And the goal here is to match it.
So there's still more guidance coming out, and we know this is complicated and complex, but this tool should help you work with your financial professional, your accountants, to help you calculate FTEs and forgiveness. More guidance will be coming out over the coming weeks, but please use this to help you work with your financial professionals to strategize and get the most forgiveness.
So if one way I had 11 and one I had 13, the way I justify it is through the one that came up with the 11.
Of course, you want to pick the period with the lowest full-time employee equivalents.
And Richard, you mentioned that you had subcontractors. Do subcontractors count as part of payroll?
They do not. So they did not count in the loan, and they do not count here. However, if your subcontractor is willing to become your employee for this 8-week period, you could hire them, and that could help you with your total amount of payroll and your FTE count. And so it'd be great to hire them. That's a great opportunity, and that's really where you can win big on this.
Yeah, so it sounds like it makes sense to look at some of the subcontractors, Richard, you've had and potentially bring them as employees. And I know we've talked a bit about using this loan for payroll and rent. How much can you use for payroll? How much can you use for rent and utilities? What does that kind of look like? Because I know you can use it for each of those things.
Sure. Well, let's talk about, I'm using the word rent very generically. Let me tell you what rent really means. Rent includes the rent for your store. It includes the utilities. And there's a lot in this law that says two phrases. One is as it existed prior to the loan. So it can't be a brand new lease. You can't suddenly start paying more. The other term is incurred and paid. So you can't pay back rent and you can't pay front rent. You can only pay stuff that was incurred and paid during this 8-week period. And so you can pay your rent if the lease existed prior to February 15th. But rent also includes rent on a copy machine or on a postage machine or maybe even on your car. That interpretation is going to come out, but I actually believe at this point that it can include your card as well. Utilities are also very broadly defined. Gas and electric and water are obvious, but it also includes phone and utilities and gas for your car. And so, but I will say that you had to have been paying these things for your business in the last year. So if the bank does a good job, they're going to look at your 2019 tax return and see that you were paying all these things. Excuse me. However, in your case, you said to me that your loan was $100,000 and your rent is $30,000. You're not going to be able to have all your rent reimbursed because in the end, rent is going to get reduced first by your FTE change, and second, it can't exceed 25% of the total forgiveness. And so that's one of the steps in order to reduce how much you actually get forgiven. Look, you can make it up on subcontractors by converting them to employees. So you'll have the opportunity for it, but you're not, in your case, you're not going to be able to have all of your rent included.
But it doesn't, but they talk about helping small business. This is a separate conversation.
Well, it can help your business. And here's how they designed it for that. The first is they said in the law, as they're negotiating this law, that we'll help employers pay the first 8 weeks of payroll. And then some people said, but the business still has to exist. So they added 25% on top of that for overhead. So that's where the 8 weeks turned into 10 weeks worth of payroll in the loan amount versus in the forgiveness amount. So they do have that 25% built in. But there actually is a nice hidden benefit here that might help the business owner that I'm also a little unsure of. They say that the loan is the forgivable portion of the loan is not going to be taxable. Well, that's great, but there's another part of that equation that they may not be saying. The question then becomes, are the expenses thereby deductible? So if someone gives me money and I pay bills with it, can I still deduct those bills? So technically in the law, the answer is no. But the spirit of this law says that you should be able to. So I expect in further guidance that they're going to explain this. So let's say you have a $100,000 loan and all you do is spend it on employees, $100,000 worth, and they're not even able to work. So you didn't gain any value. I believe that when the guidance comes out, you're going to be able to report a $100,000 loss, plus your normal income and benefit by that. If you're in a 40% bracket, tax bracket, That's $40,000 in your pocket. So it pays to use up the loan, even if you're not getting value for it, for the tax deduction. And again, that could be a big help for you.
Yeah, and just to bring this back to making sure we have full forgiveness here. What are the reduction? Are there reductions in earnings that don't apply to employees?
All right. So I think what you're alluding to is the third way of losing forgiveness, and that is an employee by an employee basis. And so if you were paying, so the way the law is written, it says, take how much you paid the employee for the first quarter of 2020 and compare that to how much you paid them during the 8-week period. And if you paid them less than 75% of the first quarter, that amount of money comes off forgiveness as well. So let me give you a dramatic example. First, we don't really understand what this means. Let's say someone earns $1,000 a week. The first quarter of 2020, you paid them $13,000. If you keep paying them $1,000 a week, you'll have only paid them $8,000 during that period of time. So I don't think that their intention was to have you lose forgiveness for paying someone the same amount. I think you have to average the weeks out and say it's been an average of $1,000 a week and you're okay. However, let's take that same employee and say they're not willing to come back to work until the very last week. Now you've only paid them $1,000. So we take the $8,000 comparable from the first quarter. They give you 25% leeway. So now we're down to you have to pay them $6,000, but you only paid them $1,000. I think potentially you're going to lose $5,000 of forgiveness by having that person come back for 1 week.
Bob, do you have to treat all employees the same? So for example, in your analogy, can I give someone else more money to make up the total amount of money for forgiveness?
Well, you can give someone more money in order to have more payroll and drive up your top number. However, each employee, and remember, so they're coming at you in different directions. The first direction is the total amount that you spend. The second one is your FTE count, your full-time employee count. But the third one here is employee by employee. So if you have someone that comes back for less than their average wage, you're in danger of paying some of that loan back regardless. Now,
but if I kept them at 75, so can I work someone during the 8-week period at 75% of their salary, but make it up with someone else as long as everyone's at 75 or above? Do I have to treat all employees equally is the question.
You do not have to treat employees equally, and I believe you should be able to do that. I will tell you, there is a Hail Mary or a safe harbor to these testings. And it's one sentence, and so we don't know how to interpret it. But if on June 30th, you've rehired somebody at what they were earning before, then that employee doesn't count. Also, if that employee, and again, they phrase this poorly, earns over $100,000 a year, the government basically says we don't care about them. And so you can chop their salary anything you want. And it's interesting how they define who earns over $100,000 a year. They defined it as anybody who in any pay period during 2019 earned a salary at a rate of $100,000 or more. So that means if you have someone on a weekly payroll and they earn, $700 a week, and you gave them a $1,500 Christmas bonus, well, that 1 week they earned at a rate greater than $100,000, they would be excluded from this calculation, provided we don't get different guidance on it. But that's how the law currently reads.
And you mentioned earlier that only 25% can be on rent and utilities. Does that include like mortgage? Does that include your mortgage? And I don't know if you mentioned this, but can you prepay rent, right? If Richard only has a little bit of rent, can he prepay a few months rent?
So prepaid rent doesn't count because it goes back to two important words: incurred and paid. And there's also controversy over those two words. So obviously a future rent has not yet been incurred. So does it have to be incurred and paid, or incurred or paid? And we don't really have that answer. Look, you have to take the conservative approach in advance and assume that it's incurred and paid in that pay period as well. And so I would say probably cannot. So, but let me give you a payroll example. We have a client that ended their pay cycle on the 28th. They received their PPP loan on the 29th, and they paid their employees on the 30th for the cycle that ended on the 29th. So is that payroll included in PPP forgiveness or not? And quite frankly, I don't know the answer. I'm going to assume that it's not, to be conservative. And if the guidance changes, I'll do it. But I will tell you that 8 weeks from now, I'm paying people 2 days early so that payroll will be included. And so you really have to maybe even start a brand new payroll cycle for when you get the PPP loan. I know, most businesses are on a calendar week, but you may have to start paying people, Wednesday to Tuesday instead in order to coincide with the rules. Remember, it's an 8-week race. And so you have to jam everything into that 8 weeks. And
So, Bob, I'm sorry. So the definition of the payroll, because I think in most cases you pay back payroll. Your payroll goes through, like our payroll goes through this week, and they get their checks on Thursday, but it's for the previous 2 weeks.
Correct.
So if I got my loan today and my payroll hit tomorrow, is that considered eligible because the payroll got taken out of my bank after I got my loan, but for payroll before I got the loan?
The truth is, I don't know the answer, and no one really knows that answer. But until we get further guidance, I think you have to assume that the payroll would have to have been incurred working during that, since the day you got the loan, and paid. And so you're going to have to change your pay cycle, at least for that last payroll, to pay people on the last day. Not, weekends on Saturday, you pay people the next Wednesday or Thursday. You're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have to pay people that Friday, the day the week ends, in order to get credit for it on that last pay cycle, to be within that 8-week window. Now, look, I hope we get better guidance on this. It would have been great if they said in the law, you can include your next 8 weeks worth of payroll whenever you happen to start, beginning with the next payroll cycle and ending. But that's not what the law says. The law says it's a race with a start the day you get the loan and a finish 8 weeks thereafter.
And the loan starts, Bob, just to clarify, the loan starts the day the money is given to you by your bank, not when you sign the documents or any of that, correct?
It's interesting. People are interpreting that differently. We are starting the day after the loan hits the bank. So if the money gets in the bank Tuesday, it's available to you Wednesday. We're starting Wednesday. We are having most of our clients close their payroll out on Tuesday, pay employees whatever they're due, and we're starting a brand new pay cycle. And just so that we can really keep track of it, we're probably having most people go on a weekly pay cycle, just so we can monitor it closely.
Yeah, I think that brings up an interesting question, though. And Richard, I don't know if you're facing this, but what happens if you get the money, today, but your employees don't feel comfortable or safe coming to work tomorrow, right? Like, what happens to you then? Are you just out of luck, or what happens there?
Well, I think the bigger question, Todd, is a great point, is Bob, if people refuse to come back to work, how can you possibly hold the full-time employee status? And I've read articles of people, because of whatever reason, not wanting to come back to work. How do you get back up to that full-time employment status?
Well, there's a big elephant in the room, and let me throw it out there. The biggest conflict in this law comes from the unemployment program that the federal government set up. If you're collecting unemployment, you get whatever your state benefits are, plus $600. And so let's say you have an employee that was earning $500 a week. Here in New Jersey, we pay 60% unemployment. So they would be getting $300 a week, which is pretty close to what they were earning because you don't pay as many taxes on it and you're not commuting and incurring costs. Now, the federal government's adding $600. So now they're coming home with 900 a week with less taxes than 500 a week with more taxes. They don't want to come back to work. They'll say whatever they have to say, but employees don't want to come back to work, and it's a problem. And so your choices are tell unemployment they're refusing to work and ruin your relationship, probably all your employees. But if you go through the formulas here, depending on how much work you have available, it might be worthwhile compromising with the employee and paying them a little more to compensate for that extra federal program. Everyone's gonna have to run through the numbers, and it's complicated. You have to run through the numbers and see, you may have to pay them more. But again, you remind your employees, look, how about benefits? So I hope you're charging employees COBRA while they're on unemployment, because otherwise they're getting a free ride for everything. And so it's difficult. You may have to find new employees. So I'm very fortunate. Todd's mom is my new receptionist. So I'm going to have to pay her. And so she counts as an employee because other people weren't willing to come in. And that's perfectly legitimate. Maybe your subcontractors are willing to work. It'd be great to put them on payroll. That's where you have to be opportunistic. Look, nothing says that just because you're a carpet store, you can't hire people to do other things. Paint the store, clean some, pay people to do whatever you got to do, so long as it's on payroll, in order to make up for those employees that either aren't willing to come in, won't come in, or have nothing to do if they did come in.
Yeah, and when it comes to forgiveness, right, we're going to go through how to calculate it, but is there documentation you're going to have to give when you're providing loan forgiveness? Let's say Richard tries to calculate it. What documentation does he have to give in order to get his loan forgiveness, which is hopefully 100%?
Sure. Well, it's interesting. On the loan application side, every bank was asking for different things because the rules really weren't out. Now they have time to regroup and look at this. And I believe banks are going to take a second look at your loan in the forgiveness process because there's going to be less pressure on them at that point. And so there is fairly good guidance out on what they're going to need. They're going to need payroll records. They're going to look for a copy of your lease. They're going to look at if you've been paying that same rent in the past, and a copy of the canceled check. So as silly as it seems, I'm writing my landlord a check instead of doing an automatic deposit, which I normally do, because I know that I'm going to have to show the bank a receipt. And so your health insurance bill with a copy of the check, your payroll records, if you use a payroll service, is probably fine. But they're going to look to document it. And I even have a feeling that if they lent you too much, they're going to take that off your forgiveness as well, because now they're going to have a chance to do it. The law gives them 60 days from when you give it to them for them to process it. And I think they're going to use that on this.
So is the worst case scenario here when it comes to forgiveness that you get 0% you got a $100,000 loan. Let's say Richard got the $100,000 loan. Let's say for some reason, he has no employees come back, doesn't pay rent. Let's say he gets no forgiveness. So is the worst case scenario then that Richard has a 1% interest rate on his $100,000 loan? Or what is the worst case scenario here, saying you get extreme case 0%, zero forgiveness?
You have a 1% loan for 2 years. That is your worst case scenario, but it would break my heart. So that would be worse. Okay. You got to find a way. You got to find a way to spend it. You got to be creative.
Almost everyone needs a strategy on how to spend their money, and it's different for everybody.
You're right. And what's interesting about that is during the loan application process, people were clamoring for the information about how to get the maximum loan. And it was really led by, I'm going to say, some of the large CPA firms with larger clients and organizations like that. Now come forgiveness time, no one's even asking yet. So when I look at accounting blogs, we don't even see that happening yet, because for the big firms, they don't care. They don't have to do it yet. For me and for my clients, or for most of the carpet stores, you need to strategize. Once that first payroll ticks by, you can't add someone and be you can't get a full-time equivalent of anyone you add after the first week, because they missed the first week or two of payroll. And so we need those answers now. I don't see us getting them. So that's why we have to take the most conservative approach.
I always thought I could count that payroll. That's a big difference in my strategy. And like you said, what do I do? Because I'm planning on bad information, not me, but what do I do?
Okay.
That's my biggest confusion.
No, you're right. And I don't have an answer for you. Anyone who says they have an answer is lying. So how do you have a biweekly payroll or weekly payroll?
Bi-weekly.
Okay.
We do 26 payrolls.
Okay. So over an 8-week period, you normally have 4 payrolls, correct?
Correct.
I want you to have 5. So you're going to, I want you to have 5.
Right.
So you're going to have 1 payroll for the period of time really before the loan that you're paying after you get the loan. And then at the very end, I want you to change your pay date, back it up a few days so you can jam in a 5th payroll cycle. So by the time you go for forgiveness, we'll have a better answer and we'll know if we can submit 4 or 5.
Right. So what you're saying is if tomorrow the payroll tomorrow comes in April 30th, if I get my money on April 30th, theoretically I would have till June 30th. So you're saying back my payroll up to pay it on June 27th. So I'm more than clear.
Correct. Correct. And so look, the week might end on Friday. You might not pay that until Wednesday of the next week. You can't do it. You've got to call it in a few days earlier. You've got to estimate how much people are going to work. Look, for people on salary, it's easy, but you've got to pay people on that last day early. So you've got to adjust your payroll cycles to accommodate it. And in your case, I hope you have 5 full 2-week payroll cycles paid for in that 8-week period.
Well, in theory, if I get my money on Thursday and it counts, and I'm moving my payroll to be deducted on Friday, because you can play around with that.
Yep.
Right. So I'll have my loan on Thursday, theoretically, have my payroll taken out of my bank on Friday, but my loan started on Thursday. I will get in 5 payrolls.
You will. But again, I'm not sure they're going to count 5. But I'm worried about the beginning and I'm worried about the end. So the words in the law say incurred and paid. And so they can argue that that first payroll wasn't incurred. And if you don't adjust your payroll cycle at the end, they can argue that it wasn't paid. So if you're not careful, you can end up with 3 payrolls. We're trying to end up with 5. We're going to settle for 4 probably. But
as long as I move it before June 30th, they can't argue the back pay.
Not 2 months, 28 days. I'm sorry, 8 weeks, 56 days. It's not 60 days, it's 56 days.
Right, but it works out 4 weeks. It happens to work out in these months. I do have a question that's I don't know if you know the answer to. Has anything come out about, I know some people that have not gotten their loans in the first wave and are waiting to get paid in the second. There's no way they're going to have 8 weeks before June 30th. Have they talked about extending that date?
Yes. No one thinks that's an issue at all. And I think that's an incorrect interpretation of the law. The June 30 date is the safe harbor part, which people can rely on to not count the, and we should talk about that, to not count these two of these tests against you. If on June 30th, you have restored your FTE and you've restored each employee to what they were earning before, you don't have to count those tests against you. The problem is I don't really know what that means. So you mean if I on June 29th call up my employees and they come to work June 30th and then July 2nd I fire them, did that work? You know, I don't know that answer. And they didn't provide any guidance about that. And so we're hoping to receive something like that because, you know, that's your Hail Mary at the end, you know, in order to get some forgiveness. And so under that scenario, it'd be hard pressed to think that you get 0 and all you get is a 1% loan. There's got to be payroll. There's got to be something in there. But if you end up with, let me play with math, I'm sorry. But if you have $30,000 of payroll, if you divide that by 3 and you can have $10,000 worth of rent. So then the rent is 10, the total is 40, and the 10 is 25% of the 40. And so the more payroll you have, the more rent you can deduct. So in your case, where you have a big rent, you have to really jack up the payroll as much as you can in order to make that work.
Yeah,
go ahead. I have to be, I mean, I have 75% of my 100,000 for payroll and 25% for the other expenses like rent and utilities.
Correct. Correct.
You can't really jack it. You can't really jack it up, to use your word.
No, my point is if your payroll is short, you're going to be short on rent. because it's connected. So if you only get $50,000 of payroll in, you're going to have that much less rent forgiven, because in the end, it's not your rent. It's not 25% of the 100,000 you're borrowing. It's 25% of the forgiveness amount. So
let's go over that scenario. Let's say I only did 50,000 in payroll,
right,
for whatever reason, because I think that's a good point. And therefore, so they gave me 100,000. They put 100,000 in my bank. I use 50 for payroll, and if I used it, then I have 50,000 more. They're going to ask for it's about 16,700. So theoretically, my loan would go down to 66.
correct.
Thousand. I would owe them 34,000, back to Todd's point, over 2 years at 1%. That's the worst case.
Well, no. You could take, now you're down to 67,000, and then you were, let's just say for argument's sake, you were only at, 80% of your full-time employment then. Now you have to take 20% off that 67. And then let's say you had one employee who only worked half the amount and earned 4,000 less, then you take another amount off for that as well. So each of these are reductions.
But then it would be a reduction in the forgiveness, but you would just have that prorated part as a loan, not the whole loan.
Correct. Well, so let's use easy numbers for a minute. Let's say your rent, your salaries were 50,000, and you were only at 80% FTE. That brings your salaries that you're going to get reimbursed down to 40. So that brings your rent down to 13,000. So now your max loan is 53.
And I think what Richard is asking there is whatever's left over, whatever's not forgiven is what you're going to have to pay back over time. It's not binary. It's not up. You didn't do it, so now you have to pay back your whole loan. It's whatever part isn't forgiven. That's the only part you have to pay back over the period of time.
But my point is, building up to 100% FTE saves you more than dollar for dollar payroll. Once you hit 100% FTE, only then is your savings dollar for dollar.
Back to that full-time person in that 8 weeks. So say I'm short one person. I think you touched on this, but I just wanted to get it clear because it isn't to me. If I hire another person, forget to do whatever job, whether it's installer, to paint the place, to clean up the place, and I go from 12 to 13 the last week of my loan, does that qualify me for the full-time employees?
Well, there's two ways it could. The first is for the FTE count, they're only going to be there for 1/8 of the 8-week period. So you only get credit for 1/8 of a full-time employee for that purpose. However, we have that Hail Mary test on June 30th, that if on June 30th, you're back to where you were, then you don't have to count it for all the other weeks. And so we just don't know how that's going to work. And so it's not the end of the 8-week period. It's June 30th, a specific day.
Did that answer your question, Richard?
So you're saying the FTE is specifically on the date of June 30th?
It's two. It's your average FTE during the 8-week period. And if you get that up to 100%, then you don't lose any forgiveness. The other way in that same category to not lose forgiveness is by being back to 100% by June 30th.
But you just said if I hired that 12th person the week before, it only counts as 1/8. So I'm a little confused.
That's when you're examining the 8-week period. So you get 2 bites at resolving the same problem. The first bite is the average over the 8 weeks. The second bite is where are you on June 30th? And so by hiring that person right before June 30th, you're helping achieve that second bite. Is it
either or both?
Either or. Either or. So some people, their strategy is, I'm just going to, hire who I need, keep it down low. And then at the very end of June, I'm going to hire everyone back. And that strategy will work for some people. It will lower the amount of rent you can pay. It will lower your potential tax benefit, but it's a strategy that works.
But you won't get, if your loan was based on all those full-time employees, you're not going to have the whole thing forgiven.
Correct.
And back
Correct.
to Todd's point, that part that's not forgiven would then be a 2-year loan.
Correct. But I'd be hard pressed to not hire a landscaper to fix out the front, a painter. I would do whatever is labor intensive. I'm hiring people on payroll to do them. You have to be creative. If you have a bookkeeper that comes in and she has her own business, or he, put them on payroll. Any type of service that you get, you can try to put on payroll.
Is there any advantage to going above your previous FTEs? If it's over 100%, does it matter?
No, because the formulas start with, so let's say once you're over the FTE, it doesn't help at all. No.
So being 1.1 versus 1.2 or 1 doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Just achieving 100% is important. And the same thing with going over on payroll. It doesn't help to go over, because all these formulas start with the lesser of your loan or what you spent.
The one question I have, Bob, is you touched on it, but I just think it's important because there are people all over the country listening. Some people have been in business, some people have furloughed employees, and some people have closed business. So if you want to touch on maybe the strategy in those 3 different cases, any insight you might have for the dealers that are in those 3 categories.
Sure. Look, but each business really is unique and has different opportunities. How many family members are in the business, and maybe we can boost up family members' salaries, or what could be done around the place. And so it really is different. Let me think about this a minute. So let's say the store is closed, you're not allowed to open. Let's take the most dramatic example. The truth is, this program sucks because your employees are going to come home with less money by you paying them than them staying on unemployment. And you have to hope that the place opens up soon. And I would say, let's say you're 4 weeks into this, you can maybe get half the loan forgiven. At that point. Well, no, that's not true. If they come into it 4 weeks, you can pay them their normal salary. You can give them an economically justifiable bump up in salary or a bonus to have more forgiven, which by paying them more, it really doesn't come out of your pocket in this example, but you should test it to make sure. It'll increase the amount of rent you can deduct. It'll increase the amount of your tax deductibility. And so maybe you can give them a bonus. Hopefully you've been giving them bonuses in the past, so it doesn't look so out of sorts. So even paying them for 4 weeks or 2 weeks, so long as by June 30, you're back to where you were, then that can still work for you. And again, we don't have guidance on it, but maybe you can fire them again July 4th, and they can go back on unemployment. So when we're not sure how long nowhere in the law does it say you have to maintain the full staff that you had before. You only have to have it on June 30th. Look, we expect guidance, and hopefully we get that before June 30th. For the company that's still working and busy, really, they just shouldn't have a problem. They shouldn't have a problem doing this. Listen, I think meeting with your accountant early on so they're ready to help you do this and plan it out with you is important for everyone. But look, like all things in life, you have to be opportunistic. You have to see what's available to you that you're able to do and spend on other things. If you want to have a marketing campaign, maybe you hire people now to do all that work. Hiring the subs is a reasonable thing. So it's really much more opportunistic than circumstances, I would say.
And there's a whole bunch of people here that also didn't get the PPP. And on our kind of third and final webinar, when it comes to PPP, we're going to talk about this. But what are the opportunities for people that just didn't get the PPP loan?
Right. And so it's worthy of a talk to itself, but there is payroll tax and forgiveness based on your payroll taxes. of if your business was down by 50%, you pay people, you can have 50% of what you pay them, up to $5,000 per employee, basically paid for by the government. And it's worthy of a seminar itself, but instead of remitting money to the government that came out of employees' checks, you get to hold that money right then. So you get the money pretty fast, in doing that.
But you don't get those payroll tax credits if you did get the PPP. That's just for people.
Correct. It's one or the other. And then you can do that for another 3 months if your sales don't return to 80% of where they were. So you have to be down 50% in order to qualify, and then down 80% to qualify for the next quarter.
Yep.
A lot of details that we'll go over, in that as well. I actually think it's strategic on their part to not come out with guidance till after it's over.
Why?
So that people can't monkey around like I'm trying to do as hard as possible.
Well, no, but what they're going to do is a lot of people are going to get caught off guard, which shouldn't be the purpose of the loan. To not give the people the money, Bob. I mean, if I think I'm doing everything right and I misinterpret it because it's not clear, I don't think you should be penalized. And I'm afraid that's what's going to happen to a lot of people.
Isn't that what happens when politicians write?
Yeah. No, it's a perfectly reasonable fear, and it's going to happen to some people, right? Which is why, in the example we talked about before, I want you to have 5 payrolls in your 8-week cycle so that you can potentially have 5. And some people are going to only have 3 because, they just kept their cycle as it was. And the first one didn't count because it didn't occur. And the last one didn't count because it was paid after. So you just have to take as many precautions as possible.
So you bring an installer on for the 8 weeks. And then how soon after that June 30th date do you take them off?
I think immediately.
So July 1.
I would say at the end of that payroll cycle, I think you can take them off. Look, I would look for further guidance at that point, but I don't see why there would be any need at this point to keep them on beyond that.
What's his incentive? What's his incentive besides doing you a favor?
Well, you're paying his Social Security tax. He's getting unemployment, disability, workers' comp, and Social Security and Medicare all covered on his behalf. So he's doing better by it. He's still going to have plenty of income in the beginning and the end of the year to offset with expenses. So to be honest, I think it's a win for them. Plus he's getting the work. He's building a relationship, but it's worth it for him.
So would you say it's worth what, in the 20 to 25% to him? The Social Security and stuff?
12%.
12%?
Well, no, because, they pay a high workers' comp rate probably. And so it could be worth more than 12% because now you're picking up those costs. So Social Security and Medicare is 7.5%, 7.65%. State unemployment, family leave, every state is different. It's got to be 15%. You need to be careful about benefits. So you need to have like a 3-month waiting period for health insurance and pension and things like that to make sure they don't get on to that. But I'll tell you, so a little commentary is that states have been pushing for a decade, getting rid of freelancers in favor of employment. Big cases going back 20 years, big case against Microsoft, and they keep happening. It was a big part of Obamacare in order to fund it. They were getting subcontractors. You have to issue 1099s to everybody for everything was the original premise. And it was to get more people employed. By them being employed instead of being a sub, they can't take expenses, and everything is being, reported legitimately. There's no underground economy. It's being a big push for a long time. Now that our government is paying people unemployment insurance when they never paid in, they're called gig workers or freelancers. These people never pay premiums. They're getting benefits. Well, how's that sustainable? And once they give us something, they can't take it away. They're going to either require freelancers to start paying unemployment premiums, or they're going to require you to hire them as an employee. In my opinion, I think that the installers now who work for 4 or 5 stores are just going to have 4 or 5 part-time jobs, and they're going to be on payroll everywhere. That's the trend around the country. New York, New Jersey, California are leading the way. They're suing Uber to put everyone on payroll, and it's going to have to catch on everywhere. So they need the revenue.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Richard, thanks for joining us from Florida. Dad, once again, thanks for joining us from the beautiful state of New Jersey. Our next webinar will be on, really for everyone that didn't get the PPP loan, it'll be on payroll tax forgiveness. For everyone that did attend and everyone that is watching, we have a downloadable on our blog. It is a worksheet that helps you understand and estimate what your forgiveness looks like. So come to our blog, download our interactive worksheet on forgiveness, and we're looking forward to seeing you at our next webinar.